Patrice stepped out the back door, unhurried, slipping her feet into the same old sandals that were as familiar as her own steps down the familiar path. She clutched her water bottle under her arm, the coolness spreading a little across her skin, a reminder that it was hotter than she had expected. The small gated community in Temecula, California, had been her home for the past 9 years. She knew the streets, the blocks, even the names of the HOA board members. A quiet suburb where young families, retirees, and a few techies shared a space of order and routine. Patrice had paid off her mortgage, and for her, this place was more than just an address, it was a part of who she was. She wasn't wearing a uniform today. A rare day off. A loose long-sleeved shirt over a simple black outfit, her capri joggers were tight. Her hair was tied back, her face was bare, no makeup, no badge. Looking at her now, no one would have thought she was a responsible person. They saw only a woman who looked a little tired, and that was exactly what she wanted, normal. She pushed open the iron gate, stepped into the communal pool, and waved to Louise, the young student lifeguard who had seen her here dozens of times. Louise nodded back, "Good afternoon, Miss Holman." Patrice just smiled, found a chair near the shallow edge, and sat down, breathing a sigh of relief. The pool was only moderately crowded. A few older couples were reading, children were laughing and splashing, and a young mother was patiently coaxing her child into a life jacket. It was a peaceful, warm, quiet scene. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the sun soothe her. Not thinking about work, not thinking about late reports, not thinking about the new recruits she had to evaluate or the politicians from City Hall. There was only the soft splash of water, the soft laughter, and time seemed to stand still. But then, she heard footsteps. Something about the way the person approached made Patrice open her eyes. A tall, white man in khaki shorts and a neatly tucked-in polo shirt. He stood near her chair, not smiling, not holding a towel, not looking like he was enjoying a relaxing day by the pool. He looked like someone looking for a problem. "Excuse me," he said, polite but with a hint of sarcasm. "Do you live here?" Patrice blinked, sitting up a little. "Yes, I do." He crossed his arms over his chest, his eyes searching. "I've never seen you here before. This pool is for residents only." Patrice looked at him for a moment. No one else seemed to be paying attention to their conversation, but her eyes lingered on the newly printed HOA flyer peeking out of his pocket. There wasn't a drop of sweat on him, perhaps this was his first summer here. "I live 3 doors down," she said, her voice steady. "I've been here for almost a decade." He chuckled, a laugh that was less of humor than of disbelief. "Right." She didn't move, didn't waver. "And I didn't accidentally walk in," she said, her eyes still on him. "I used the gate like everyone else." The man's jaw tightened slightly. "We've had some problems lately." Patrice slowly uncapped her water bottle, not taking her eyes off him. She knew the type. The type who assumed that just because they hadn't seen her, she didn't belong here. And she knew she wasn't going anywhere. Patrice tilted her head, her sharp eyes scanning the man before her. "What's your name?" He hesitated for a beat. "Dennis. Dennis Whitlow. I just moved in last month." Patrice nodded slowly. "Dennis, I live here. If you check the HOA directory, you'll see my name listed. Patrice Holman." He didn't move. Instead, his gaze slid over her shoulder as if he were waiting for someone to give him a thumbs up, but no one was paying attention to the exchange. A young mother was still struggling with her toddler. Louise, the lifeguard, had her headphones on and seemed to be paying attention to nothing but the music. The pool reflected the afternoon sun, but for that moment, the world seemed to be all about them. Dennis took a small step forward, his back straight and his eyes full of the smugness of someone convinced he'd caught someone in the act. "You don't have the key fob on you." Patrice raised an eyebrow. "It's in my pocket." "So?" He stared at her through narrowed eyes, his voice a little challenging. I'll call the HOA board and report it. She shrugged. Whatever. Dennis opened his mouth, as if to say something, then closed it again. Patrice could see that this wasn't just about rules. It was about assumptions. And Dennis wasn't done making them. He didn't leave, instead standing like a bouncer enjoying a power trip. Patrice recognized the pose. She'd seen it too many times, on the sidewalk, at school meetings, even in the courtroom. It was the pose of someone who had decided who she was and didn't expect to be wrong. I just thought it was weird that I'd been here a month and never seen you, Dennis said, his voice tinged with doubt. You think neighbors are going to run into each other more often? Patrice leaned back in her chair. Or maybe you're just looking in the wrong direction. A mocking smile crossed his lips. You could make this easier, or we could call security and find out. She didn't move. Dennis, I told you, I live here. His voice was sharper. I don't need that attitude. Patrice looked him straight in the eye, her voice calm but steady. And I don't need to be interrogated in my own pool. The air around them was tense, the conversation a thread that was about to snap. A few people around them began to notice, not stare, but enough to notice that something was amiss. Just that, a little attention from the surroundings was enough to make Dennis waver. He gestured toward her bag. Then why not just show me your FOB? She chuckled. Because I don't owe you anything. I don't belong here. Before I could say another word, he flinched. His jaw tensed for a brief moment, as if he were debating whether to react or stay calm. But then Dennis stuck to his guns. He was making things harder than they needed to be, unless he had something to hide. Patrice interrupted. Are you going to let me stay or not? Dennis hesitated. A flash of surprise crossed his eyes as he realized she'd said it so bluntly. Patrice wasn't angry yet, but she had more than 25 years of experience in law enforcement. She'd trained officers in de-escalation. She knew exactly what Dennis was doing, trying to take control, shaping the conversation to make her smaller, to make himself feel more powerful. I don't need your permission, she insisted. From a nearby bench, an older man in a baseball cap looked up. He had been reading a paperback, but now he could no longer ignore the tension in the air. Everything okay, Patrice? Dennis blinked. Patrice nodded at the man. I'm fine, Carl. Thanks. Dennis looked between them, his eyes wavering slightly. The change was almost imperceptible, but Patrice saw it. Someone else had recognized her. She wasn't the outsider Dennis thought she was. His pride still wouldn't let him back down. I just don't understand why confirmation is such a big deal. Dennis muttered, his voice quieter now but still firm. There are rules here for a reason. Patrice sat up straighter, her eyes sharp but her voice still soft. You saw a black woman sitting alone and decided something was wrong. You didn't ask. You made an accusation. You didn't check the facts. You made an assumption. And now you're trying to reinforce it because you're embarrassed. Dennis opened his mouth to say something, but stopped. Not right away. Not about that. So what's it really about? Patrice tilted her head, genuinely curious. You came here as an undercover cop with something to prove? The question hit a nerve. Dennis's mouth twitched. He looked at Carl, then back at her. The air around the pool grew quieter. The conversations continued, but there was a subtle shift in perception. A few people were listening, though they tried to pretend they weren't. Finally, Dennis spoke up. I didn't mean to be wrong. The explanation wasn't exactly an apology. I just care about this community. And I've been a part of it longer than you've known how to spell a zip code. Patrice pursed her lips, her gaze boring into his. There was a long silence. Then she exhaled, shaking her head slightly. Dennis hesitated, as if he were about to leave, but his ego still had one last thing to say. If you really live here, his voice was strained, I guess there's nothing wrong with you showing proof. That's all I'm saying. But Patrice had no intention of playing by Dennis's rules. And she wouldn't back down. She didn't need to say a word to prove who she was. Dennis lingered. He didn't shout, he didn't curse. But Patrice understood that confrontation didn't have to be loud. The way he stood, casting a shadow in the sunlight, keeping his distance enough to be noticeable, but not so close as to be disturbing, he existed in that space as a warning. Patrice let him ponder the awkward silence before slowly reaching into her tote bag. She didn't grab a badge, just a bottle of water. She flipped the cap off, took a sip, and leaned back as if she had all the time in the world. I don't know what you think is going to happen here, she said, her eyes still fixed on the bottle. Dennis crossed her arms. I think you're making this unnecessary. She looked straight at him now. No, I think I'm watching you turn it into something else. You came in with preconceived notions, and now you don't know how to back out without looking stupid. Across the pool, a girl was watching. She must be 16 or 17. Her phone was in her hand, not yet raised, but her attention was clearly on them. Dennis watched and took the opportunity, his voice sour. Is this where you make a scene? Patrice pursed her lips. But you already did. From the monitoring chair, Louise, the lifeguard, finally noticed the shift in energy. He pulled out an earpiece, sat up a little straighter, not yet intervening, but the tension was already tingling. Dennis breathed heavily through his nose, shaking his head. This is unbelievable. I came looking for community and this is what I get. Patrice frowned. No. You get resistance because you don't pay attention to anyone else. You're trying to control a space you just entered. He sneered. Wow. Okay. Now I'm the bad guy. You're the loud guy. From the corner of the pool, the girl holding the phone felt amused. Dennis closed his eyes, then paused. That moment said it all. Patrice tilted her head. You think you're tactful, but you're not tactful. You saw me, judged me, and now you're surprised I didn't react the way you expected. He shifted his weight, starting to waver. His moral ideals began to crack. You could just prove me wrong and end your sales pitch. Or, she shrugged. You could come over like a nice guy, introduce yourself, and ask me if I'm new to the neighborhood. Dennis's face was red, not just a little pink, but a real flush. He wasn't used to being talked to like this, especially not by someone he thought should have backed off in the first place. But Patrice stood there, unfazed. She wasn't intimidated, and that made Dennis even angrier. The young mother with the toddler was watching too. She didn't say anything but took a step closer to her child, as if preparing herself if things got worse. The tension was palpable around the pool. Dennis scanned the area and noticed that the others were paying attention to him as well. Anger boiled in his chest, but he also knew that he was losing control of the situation. I'm going to talk to the HOA board and have them handle this, he announced, his voice full of defiance. Make sure you say exactly what you told me, Patrice replied, her voice calm but sharp. Dennis stiffened. He was used to people jumping up when he barked, but Patrice was not. She stood her ground, not moving an inch. I've lived here 9 years, she continued, her eyes never leaving his. I served on the safety committee twice. My name is still on the HOA website under neighborhood safety. Dennis blinked, clearly taken aback. Really? His voice was quieter, less certain than before. Really, another voice said from behind him. Louise, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. Everything's fine here. We're fine, Patrice insisted. Dennis seemed caught between retreating and trying to save face. But before he could say anything more, another voice spoke from one of the benches behind him. Patrice. An old woman called out to her. Do you want us to call Ken from the council? I think he's home. It was Florence Godwin, who had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone else. She didn't need to stand up, just saying the words was enough to shake things up. Dennis swallowed. He realized the eyes were on him. The mother with the child, the teenager with the phone, Carl, Florence, Louise, all of them were watching. Even the man who had been dozing in the shade had straightened up. Patrice sensed the change. The eyes were now focused not just on her but on Dennis, waiting to see what he would do next. Dennis took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He looked at Patrice again, this time not with defiance but with belated recognition. "If you really are Patrice Holman," he said, his voice softer, "then I guess I owe you an apology." "You guess so?" Patrice raised an eyebrow. "Interesting." Dennis tried to smile, but it wasn't as natural as he'd hoped. "I mean, I don't know. You didn't really announce it in the first place." Patrice didn't answer right away. She just reached into her pocket. But this time, she didn't move slowly. She pulled out a small box, flipped it open, and let the sunlight shine on the badge inside, glinting with power. And in that moment, Dennis knew he'd misjudged his opponent. Dennis clutched it tightly with both hands, as if afraid that if he let go, all his authority would evaporate. The gold badge glinted in the afternoon sun, reflecting a distorted image of his face, a face that was slowly losing its firmness. He took a step back, inhaling deeply, but the hot summer air did nothing to ease his confusion. In front of him, the nameplate, Sheriff Patrice L. Holman, was bright and unmistakable. The woman sat there, calm, her dark eyes watching him without blinking. Dennis blinked twice, his lips parted, but no sound came out. Part of him wanted to retreat immediately, but another part, a part fed by ego and a belief in default authority, wouldn't let him. "Did you say something about rules?" Patrice asked, her voice calm, but there was an invisible pull that made her words hang heavy in the air. Dennis swallowed. "I don't. I mean, you think." He stammered, trying to find a way out, but all paths were cut off by her gaze. "You didn't realize, did you?" Patrice repeated, softly but no less sharply. "I may have said it. Maybe not loud enough to drown out everything else. But, loud enough for that girl by the pool to hear." The young girl at the edge of the pool slowly lowered her phone. She didn't press the record button. But her eyes said that this moment was seared into her memory, a memory that wouldn't fade. Dennis scratched the back of his neck. "I wasn't trying to cause a disturbance." Patrice rose from her chair. Her posture hadn't changed, but something in the air made her look taller. "No. You weren't causing a disturbance. You were trying to control someone." Dennis was silent. "You came here to demonstrate power you don't have," she continued, her voice low but carrying farther than any shout. "And me? I carry my power with me every day. But I don't lead with it. Because true leadership doesn't have to be loud." The room seemed to freeze. Dennis looked down, took a deep breath, but the apology that came out of his mouth was so quiet that even he wasn't sure he'd actually said it. Patrice let the silence linger, giving him a chance to feel the weight of the moment. "You know," she said slowly, "you could have had a real conversation today. You could have introduced yourself. I could have even offered you a soda from the fridge." Dennis's face flushed. He knew she was right. And perhaps that made him angrier than anything else. He could have controlled this situation, but instead, he'd lost it from the very beginning. The girl by the pool pushed her sunglasses up to her forehead. "We know who you are, Dennis. Patrice always thought highly of you." Patrice smiled slightly. "Thanks, Carl," another voice chimed in. "The pool is still the boss's." Dennis stood for another second, as if considering something. Then he turned and walked away in silence, muttering something that no one else was listening to. A child laughed when her mother finally gave her permission to go into the water. Louise sat down, put her headphones back on, as if nothing had happened. Life at the pool slowly returned to normal, but the shock of the confrontation was still in the air. Patrice pulled down her sunglasses, took a sip of water, and leaned back in her chair, relaxing her shoulders a little. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to raise her voice. The badge wasn't the power. It was how she used it, and more importantly, when she didn't have to. But just because the confrontation was over didn't mean the story hadn't spread. And by tomorrow, the whole neighborhood would know exactly what had happened. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows on the sidewalks. Families were packing their towels, children were begging for 5 more minutes in the water, and the scent of sunscreen wafted through the air. No one had to say anything. But as Patrice walked away from the pool, towel draped over one arm, flip-flops clicking on the tile, she knew they had all seen it. The way people watched her silently, that was how stories lived longer than any words could. Patrice Holman walked slowly across the parking lot, her sneakers clicking lightly on the cool concrete. The evening wind stirred her hair as the whispers between her neighbors reached her ears. "Did you hear about the new guy?" "You mean Patrice Holman? The sheriff?" "Yeah. Poor guy. I wonder who I bumped into." She didn't stop, didn't turn around. There was just a slight slowing of the beat in her chest, a subtle sign of wariness. She was used to these back-channel conversations, silent conversations in the dark, comments muffled as she passed. That evening, she stood in the kitchen, fixing a simple dinner, grilled chicken, sliced avocado, and a glass of sparkling water with lemon. Nothing fancy. When her phone vibrated on the counter, she glanced at the screen. A text from Eliza, her friend who lived 3 streets away. "I heard you had a pool show today. Did you show your badge?" Patrice chuckled, tapping her fingers to type back the message without blinking. Just a reminder. She didn't seek attention, nor did she enjoy public confrontation. But something about that moment made her feel compelled to do so. Not to prove anything to Dennis, but for the people standing nearby, who might wonder what they would do in the same situation. A gentle knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Patrice opened it to find Florence standing there, wearing a still-steaming swim cap, holding a small Tupperware container. "I made a little too much pasta salad." Her voice was calm. "Thought you could take a break from cooking." Patrice smiled, taking the container. "Thanks, that's very kind of you." Florence lingered for a second, then said slowly, "You handled him well." Calm, composed. Patrice just nodded. "I've practiced. Everyone notices that." Florence didn't say anything more about the bad part. She just continued, "But so did the good part." Patrice didn't answer right away, just leaned against the doorframe, letting the words sink in. Florence hesitated for a second, then added something else, her voice lower. "Some of us were quiet today. But that doesn't mean we didn't see or feel what you felt. When that fall was harder than expected." After Florence left, Patrice sat down on the couch, placing the box next to her. She opened her phone, seeing a few more messages trickle into her inbox. "Carl, always respect the way you handled things. Let me know if you need anything. Louise, the rescuer, hey, Chief Holman, sorry I didn't get involved sooner. I should have. But I always supported you." Patrice treasured each message. They didn't change the day, but they added something. Like little bricks that solidified the quiet foundation of respect she'd spent years building. The next morning, she walked through the neighborhood as usual. It was only 7 a.m., the air was still cool, the shadows of trees dotted the sidewalks. As she passed the community notice board near the club, something caught her eye. A piece of paper taped to the glass. "Know your neighbor." Beneath it was a photo from an earlier HOA event, her in uniform, shaking hands with a city council member, both smiling. But now, below the photo, someone had scrawled a line in pen. She stood still, reading the words, letting the light but heavy feeling wash over her. Patrice walked into Corner Roast, the small coffee shop on Jefferson Avenue that she frequented after her morning walks. The air inside was warm and familiar, the smell of roasted coffee mixed with the scent of freshly baked pastries. Jonah, the tall, lanky barista with a never-ending smile, recognized her immediately. "Sheriff Holman," he greeted, reaching for her usual mug. "You're already trending on Nextdoor." Patrice raised an eyebrow just as he nodded, a mischievous smile on his lips. "Something about a man at the pool being a quickie." She sighed, but couldn't hide the half-smile. "I don't do anything special." Jonah handed her the coffee, his eyes sparkling with admiration. "That's exactly why people care." She left the shop with the warm coffee in her hand, but her heart was even warmer because of what she'd just heard. "When I checked my phone, a new email from the station assistant popped up with the subject line, 'You might want to see this.' Inside was a screenshot of a neighborhood forum post. I witnessed something yesterday at the community pool. A woman was harassed because she didn't look like everyone else, only to later reveal that she was the real police chief. She handled the situation with such calmness and dignity. I could only hope to have a fraction of her steadfastness. For those of you who don't know Patrice Holman, you should know that she's not just our chief. She's our neighbor." More than 24 comments below, not a single negative one. Patrice put down her phone and took a sip of coffee. She didn't need the recognition. That was never her goal. But it meant something to see people talking about respect without it ending in an argument. There was no screaming, no angry social media posts, no fallout from a controversial story. Just a quiet line in the sand, drawn with dignity. As Patrice walked home, a teenage girl jogging by slowed, pulled out an earbud, and waved shyly at her. "Hey, are you the sheriff?" Patrice smiled, nodded. "Yeah. You were amazing yesterday." "Thank you." Patrice shook her head, her smile softening. "Standing your ground shouldn't be considered cool. It should be normal." The girl nodded, as if remembering, and kept running. But Patrice knew, the moment by the pool had become something bigger. Not a citywide story, but enough to seep into every corner of the community, through deck chairs, group texts, and morning sips of coffee. That afternoon, Matteo, the neighbor's 9-year-old son, knocked on Patrice's door. He was clutching a garden hose. "Auntie Patrice, I'll give this back to you." She took it, smiling. "Thanks, Matteo. Did you have a good day?" The boy nodded, then hesitated. "Auntie Patrice, the next time I see someone sitting alone at the pool, what should I do?" She looked at him for a moment, feeling strangely warm inside. "Remember, sometimes just a smile or a hello can change someone's day." Matteo nodded firmly. "I will." Patrice watched him run home, relieved. He didn't know if the boy would remember this lesson forever, but at least, today, it had stuck in his mind. And perhaps, that was how the real changes began. She had lent it to them last week. "Hi, Patrice," he said, standing on her porch, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Is it true that you arrested a man at the pool?" She smiled, a hint of humor in her eyes. "No, honey, I didn't." He responded with a slight frown. "But my mom said he was really scared when he found out you were the police chief." Patrice leaned down a little, to be on his level with the younger boy in front of her. He wasn't scared, he was just surprised. Sometimes people judge too quickly before asking. Matteo thought about it, like when someone looks annoyed but is really just tired. "Exactly." She smiled, taking the hose from him. "You're great." "Thanks, Matteo." "Me too." After Matteo left, Patrice stood in the doorway, watching the boy for a moment. Thinking about yesterday. About all the days before. How many times had she been pushed aside, judged based on her appearance, her skin, her gender, her age. This time, the observers saw something else. They saw what patience was. Saw what restraint looked like. Saw what it meant to not give in to temptation. And maybe someone, one of the kids, one of the neighbors, or even the teenagers with the phones, would think again. The next time they saw someone cornered simply for existing in a space they had a right to stand in. She took a deep breath, stepped inside, and placed the faucet by the back door. Her badge was still there, in the box on the kitchen counter, untouched since yesterday. But somehow it got more done in 10 minutes by the pool yesterday than some people do in years behind a desk. But it's not the badge that makes the statement. It's the calm behind it. Patrice was in her 50s. She had worked hard for years to get where she was, not with loud victories, but with unwavering persistence and professionalism. She had chosen responsibility over recognition, integrity over pride, time and time again, so many times she had stopped counting. What Dennis had tried to do in the pool was not new. It was not unexpected, not shocking. It was familiar, a pattern of behavior practiced quietly over the years, slipping through the cracks of society, masked by false politeness. And that was what made it dangerous. Those moments slipped through reality like water through cracks, no one stopping to look and check. But that day was different. Patrice poured coffee, watched Dennis wipe the mirror clean, no rush, no hesitation. A normal moment, but with a familiar calculation. When her phone rang again, this time from Ken, the HOA president, she knew what the message would say. "Don't worry. I talked to Dennis this morning. He won't bother anyone again." She stared at the message for a second, then slowly typed a reply, "Thanks. Make sure no one else thinks they have the right to do the same thing." Because that was the real issue. It was never about Dennis. It was about the quiet moments people let pass. About the people who erode dignity without leaving a bruise. About the innocuous words, like, "just asking a question," or, "just trying to help," that sowed doubt in the minds of people who didn't know what was going on. That day, a city employee brought Patrice a stack of misdirected mail. She flipped through it mindlessly until an envelope caught her eye, no return address, just hastily written handwriting. She opened it. Inside was a small note. "Chief Holman. I don't know you personally, but I saw what happened. I saw how you handled it. My daughter does too. I think in 10 minutes of looking at you, she learned more than she did in a year of school. Thank you for teaching us the difference between power and dignity." A neighbor. No name. Just quiet, heartfelt words. Patrice gently folded the paper, placing it in her desk drawer. This wasn't about being a hero, she had never believed in that word. This was about being present. About standing up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt small in a space they had every right to exist in. And the next time someone tries to use arrogance to assert their power, she hopes they'll remember her. Because sometimes, silence can speak louder than any shout. And calm, unwavering composure can leave a stronger impression than any excuse. So if you ever find yourself in a situation like Patrice's, where someone tries to make you feel like you don't belong, remember this: you don't have to speak up to defend your position. You don't have to prove yourself to people who have already made up their minds. And you certainly don't have to shrink so that others can feel bigger. Be the quiet strength. The kind that speaks for itself. And when people are watching, especially young people, show them what dignity looks like when it's steady, calm, and undeniable.